Five Nights at Freddy's is no stranger to contentious characters. Though you'd be surprised, there's actually only a few of them. Most of the characters are pretty popular and beloved for one reason or another, with the main villain, the murderer William Afton, by far being one of the most popular. Which is part of the reason he has stayed a staple for so long. But there is one character whose arrival was met with a wave of confusion and disbelief, and a couple of groans, and it relates directly to William Afton and the transition away from him as a main villain. I'm talking about Burntrap, the secret final boss of Security Breach who might have initially been the primary background antagonist, but sustained major cuts, such as his assumed voice lines in an unfinished section of his boss battle. And from that alone, you know this is about to get messy. Burntrap is a gangly corpse in a rabbit suit, though with the rabbit suit having largely worn and rotted away. We can see part of his skull, along with a full set of bared human teeth, or at least ones that look very human. A fleshy, rotten substance is wrapped throughout his entire body, most notably around his carved-out stomach. He's also pretty slimy, though whether it's from decay or oil is unclear. His arms and one leg are entirely degloved, revealing their flesh-woven metal frame. His hands are tipped with points that resemble the Nightmare animatronics, with one fully uncovered. One of his feet still has his bunny boot, while the other is also totally uncovered. Now, what's interesting to note is that if you place them together, you can see that Burntrap is a deteriorated version of Spring Bonnie, specifically the Spring Bonnie model that was going to be the main threat and help wanted before he was replaced with Glitchtrap, the closest model we've ever had to a complete Springtrap. Pieces of leftover stuff cut from the game can be found in the files, showing that this was the case, and from it we got really our first fully finished official Spring Bonnie. Just look at how close he looks to Springtrap. So yeah, to make this more confusing, Burntrap is a deteriorated version of Spring Bonnie, the one that wasn't used in the game. Design-wise, Burntrap actually looks pretty cool. Maybe a little weak and frail for being such a big threat, but I personally prefer him over, say, Scraptrap. If Scraptrap looked a little more like this, but with Scraptrap's eyes and more of his visible skeletal structure, I think he would have been close to perfect, for that role at least. Personality-wise, Burntrap is something of an enigma because he appears very briefly in the game and has 0 voice lines. Except he was supposed to have voice lines. Matthew Curtis, you may know him as the voice of Music Man, recorded lines for the Security Breach trailer that were never used in-game. Here they are.
When I first found you, you were nothing. You were small, pathetic. But now, you are more. Are you ready?
You will do as I say. You will bring me what I want. And if you fail me, then you will, both of you, burn!
And he has confirmed that these were intended for Burntrap. Keeping this in mind, Burntrap's intended personality was pretty much a mirror of William Afton's, cruel, manipulative, and aggressive towards those who go against him. And with the "bring me what I want" being likely Gregory or other child victims, as we know Vanny took plenty of those, assumedly, from the missing posters inside of the newspaper, at Glitchtrap Burntrap's command, he is also a serial killer. He is pretty much William Afton, but he is also the living embodiment of Glitchtrap as well, being the one in control of Vanny, as shown by the cut lines and the fact that she has her own bedroom down beside his resting chamber. Now, there's an ongoing debate on whether Burntrap was actually Afton or the Mimic, but I don't want to cover that debate. I did make a video about whether Glitchtrap was Afton or the Mimic, but here, by the end of this, you'll see why I'm taking a pass on this one. Also, the cut content. We will cover the cut content again later on. So, if I may, the lead up to Burntrap held a weight that no character had before. William Afton, having burned to death in Pizzeria Simulator and went to hell in Ultimate Custom Night, was looking to receive a successor, and that successor came in the form of Glitchtrap, a virtual virus entwined deeply with the missing children incident, and Vanny, a young woman possessed by him. And Security Breach was the proper debut of both, with Help Wanted being their introduction, but this being the big deal starring role. The first hint of Burntrap's existence were in those trailer lines, and a sudden appearance of his hand clawing at the floor at the end of the trailer. A cutscene that didn't make it into the final game, but nevertheless teased his arrival. In Security Breach, you play as Gregory, a boy trapped in the Pizzaplex who is being hunted by Vanny, Vanessa the security guard, neither of which are seen together in the same room, the corrupted Glamrocks except for Glamrock Freddy, who is in safe mode and befriends him, and must survive the night while also figuring out the mystery of the people who went missing at the Pizzaplex. Kind of. And the mystery of what's hidden in the sinkhole under Roxy Raceway that is slowly sapping energy from the Pizzaplex's recharge stations. Finding Burntrap in all of this is one heck of a trial, let me tell you that. Burntrap is only encounterable in a single ending, which I like to call the Burntrap Ending, which requires you to not only beat Glamrock Chica, Monty, and Roxy, but then travel down into the sinkhole to confront him, while being locked out of saving once you reach 6 a.m. Now, this has been fixed, where you can save in recent patches, but only in one specific spot in the entire building. But when it first released, you better believe this led to frustration, though there was an autosave once you got to Burntrap. And also, there were very few, if any, hints to Burntrap before finding him. If you ignore the trailers, it boiled down to only the power issues and a message saying that there was an old elevator under Roxy Raceway. But once you get down there, you see the Pizzeria Simulator restaurant sunken under the ground, and then the tangle of wires and animatronic parts that resembles Molten Freddy. And slowly you realize that what you're facing is not a new monster, but a fixture of the past. Then Glamrock Freddy and Gregory fall through the floor into an office under the ground, one where Vanny has been staying, and she is not alone. The camera zips down a hallway to show us a dirty recharge station that opens like a coffin. Out spills a purple fog, and inside is a folded up body, one that unfurls itself, grabs the edge of the recharge station, and pulls itself out to reveal the first sight of none other than Burntrap. He steps out of the recharge station and lays his hand on a nearby computer screen that's showing a live feed of Glamrock Freddy. Back in the other room, Glamrock Freddy is beginning to be possessed by him. And this begins the Burntrap boss fight. I'm sorry, but I don't actually have my own footage of the Burntrap boss fight because I never ended up posting and saving my recording of my attempt for the Burntrap boss fight. And since Security Breach takes up a lot of space to download, and then I'll have to acquire a file to jump to the Burntrap boss fight, I don't want to deal with the saving thing. I'm just going to use pictures here, but let me try to give you a mental image. The Burntrap boss fight involves a few different things you have to juggle. Basically like a Survive the Night office segment, except you're running around in an office. You have 2 doors and a vent to use to keep out Shattered Monty and Chica. Roxy needs to be ran off by using Freddy's Chica Screech. Occasionally, Burntrap will attempt to possess Freddy, and you have to quickly burn Burntrap at the desk. You press a button that causes the burner to come up through the floor in his room. Eventually, the tangle starts reaching in, and you have to avoid its tentacles as well. Once you burn Burntrap enough, it triggers the final cutscene. But let me say this now, Burntrap's boss fight is pretty screwy. From how I described it, it doesn't sound too bad, but the boss battle has always been a bit clunky and glitchy, especially right after release, and it isn't exactly easy to figure out what you need to do when you're dumped in. Thank goodness for the autosaves. It's all very... In my personal opinion, the Office segments in Security Breach didn't work because it was really difficult to make the Office gameplay work in free mode. And to have that be the final boss was an unfortunate choice. I get it, because it's the ultimate callback to the original games, but it just had issues. Just ask Markiplier. Or just go watch Markiplier trying to get the Burntrap ending. It's crazy. The Burntrap ending, which for a while seemed to be the canonical ending because it was the only ending that was fully animated, such as in the beginning intro, goes as so. Burntrap is staggering away from his burning room when the Blob's Funtime Freddy head drops through the ceiling. It sees him, screeches, and grabs him up with its tentacles. The ending then cuts to Freddy and Gregory running out of the rubble, the basement collapsing around them. Then it cuts again to them sitting on a grassy hill together. Not entirely explaining how they got out, but suggesting that they successfully did, and now the reign of evil at the Pizzaplex and the Pizzaplex era itself is over. And that's also the end of Burntrap. and the beginning of the reaction to Burntrap. Now, I want you to keep in mind that when Security Breach came out, there wasn't a single word breathed about a character known as the Mimic. He was entirely off the radar. It was just Glitchtrap and Burntrap, two characters with Afton's tagline, suit, and behaviors. And one of them being located in the old pizzeria that Afton died in. So, naturally, a bunch of us assumed this massively decayed version of Spring Bonnie located in the pizzeria Afton died in underneath the Pizzaplex was William Afton returning again. And that unfortunately coincided with something else. You remember Vanny? Well, she was a fan favorite even before the game came out. She had been heavily teased and hinted since Help Wanted. She was getting a ton of fan art and was already prepared to be getting a bunch of merchandise. So, many fans were gearing up for this reluctant follower, copycat, killer, puppet to take the stage. In fact, reception to Vanny was pretty positive. And most of the fans seemed to be on board, or at least accepting of this new story in FNAF being led by a new villain. And then she ended up getting majorly cut from Security Breach. Like, she certainly appears in the endings, but throughout the game, mere seconds. Not to mention she had some hiccups in those encounters. Now, you would think this would reflect poorly on Vanny, but alas, it actually reflected worse on Burntrap. Burntrap received immediate backlash, especially by me, myself, and I, for assumedly being late William Afton being shoved back into the storyline almost immediately after getting killed off, and factoring in him getting the spot as the assumed final boss when Vanny received so many cuts. Yeah, let's say some folks weren't too happy that their wabbit waifu was shortchanged for this crotchety corpse. How many times must we teach you this lesson, old man? And no, the lack of clarification for certain aspects, like what the heck is he doing down here, didn't help matters. So Burntrap was contentious, but wait, that's not the end. Something else happened. See, Burntrap got some jeers and flack for his decrepit and skinny appearance and general lack of threat. And that's how Burntrap became Peepaw Afton. The Peepaw Afton meme pretty much overtook Burntrap for a good chunk of time. If you said Peepaw Afton, you'd know exactly who they meant. Images of an emaciated Burntrap being wheeled around in a wheelchair by Vanny became a staple of the fandom. And in my personal opinion, this kinda did worse for poor Bernie than the outcry about Vanny or Afton ever could. The disappointment in how he came out was one thing, but it could have turned around. But having him become so associated with the idea of a run-down grandpa barely shuffling himself around, oh yeah, there goes the last of his reputation. So yeah, Burntrap didn't turn out so hot, ironically. And a big part of this was almost guaranteed by the amount of cut content surrounding him. Animations, including a death animation, his voice lines, and even a second section of his boss fight. Yes, his boss fight was apparently supposed to be longer, and likely would have had that animation of him collapsing in it. To put it in perspective, the only time we see Burntrap in-game is moving around a little screen instead of being up close and personal, which we can assume might have been the case considering the extra animations. Like, that cutscene in the trailer of him crawling, was that a cut intro sequence, or would that have been a transition into a second part of a boss battle? Why is he even on the floor? Alas, we will never know. And unfortunately, due to Burntrap not being quite as cute as Vanny, those cuts were a deadlier blow to him. Needless to say, Burntrap wasn't having a good time, and it was about to get worse during his next and final so far appearance. And that was in Ruin, the continuation DLC for Security Breach. Now, just saying that, I'm sure you can imagine where Burntrap might come into this. Him returning for this second round, him getting mentioned by Gregory or Vanessa. Well, technically he is mentioned by Gregory, but see, while traveling through the destroyed Pizzaplex, Cassie, the main character of Ruin, manages to find some of Gregory's comic book drawings. And don't they look familiar? It's the alternate comic book endings shown in Security Breach. The van, the fire escape, they're all here, except one. There is one ending that isn't shown, hinting that this ending was different. Perhaps the canon one? And wouldn't you know it, but Cassie finds Burntrap deep in the Pizzaplex, far into the DLC. on one of these drawings. Yeah, in one of Gregory's alternate ending drawings. The tangled blob of remains still exists, appearing for a quick blink and you'll miss it cameo, but Burntrap, no, just this picture. And he is never mentioned again. And this is the deadliest blow of all, because, well, there goes Burntrap. And you may believe that Mimic is Burntrap, but the thing is, Burntrap didn't even show up long enough to confirm that. This bloke just be gone, cast into the abyss on a crayon-colored drawing of his own face. Honestly, given the reception to Burntrap, it's not too shocking that he didn't show up here, because Burntrap did have another problem weighing on him, and that was that his ending kinda didn't set up for where Ruin wanted to go. It kind of was a little, admittedly at the time, a little confusing. And especially with Help Wanted 2's later storyline of Vanny, now free of Glitchtrap's control, striking back against him, it would be harder to link that up together. And that's, assumedly, for now at least, the end of Burntrap. So what on earth happened? Well, that's when what happened ended up coming out. Rather recently, and during an interview, Scott Cawthon, FNAF creator and head honcho himself, came out with the truth about Burntrap, and in his own words he says that Burntrap was a complete accident. By his words, Burntrap's role in Security Breach was a result of miscommunication. He was vague about the story to Steelwool and had talked about this sort of Burntrap-like statue that would appear at various intervals in the game, and somewhere through that, there came this accidental decision of Burntrap becoming the secret boss, and then sort of the final boss, and that's why everything's a little off. Now, Scott himself said that he is at fault for this, so I'm going to assume that this is the case, and that he just had a lot of trouble getting across what he wanted done with Burntrap. It happens. I can assume that he was just trying to be very guarded with the storyline so he wouldn't have anything leaked, to a detriment towards the story. In a way, it's almost like that game where they tell a kid a phrase and he passes it around the whole class, and then it gets back to the front and it's completely different. But I want to know what went down in this purple monkey dishwasher conversation where an Easter egg cameo statue became the final boss. Some wires got crossed, that's for sure. But what does that mean for Burntrap going forward? Well, it doesn't exactly bode well for his chances of a return. If it's true, if Burntrap was this accidental addition who was then effectively decanonized in the sequel to the game, the odds of him making a major comeback are rather slim. Though the blob tangle is still shown to exist in Ruin, so it's possible Burntrap is still out there. It's possible that despite them having noticeable differences in their build, that Burntrap was Mimic, or Mimic Burntrap, or that Burntrap was a character created up by Gregory, who was inspired by the Mimic and wound up in a comic page. It could be that Burntrap appears in a future Help Wanted, or as a side character in a spin-off game, or referenced in a book. And as for coming back as the main villain, he'll now be going up against Mimic proper, the other Mimic, and possibly Vanny, so there is competition for screen time now. I can't and won't say Burntrap's gone for good, but I will say that the only thing bright about his future was the flames engulfing it. Which is to say, things aren't looking so hot. Well, after the fire died down, that is. Did Burntrap deserve the response he got? Yes and no, no and yes. Kind of, sort of. Burntrap as a concept isn't necessarily bad, and the design actually had some positives, along with the idea of this hideous corpse creature pulling strings in the background. It could have worked, but he had everything going against him. The thing is, Burntrap ended up in the worst possible scenario. If he had been Scraptrap, and that is, replacing Scraptrap in Pizzeria Simulator, he would have been great. If Security Breach hadn't have had so many cuts, specifically with his boss battle in Vanny, there probably wouldn't have been as much blowback against him. If he hadn't have shown up when FNAF was supposed to be transitioning villains, there wouldn't have been that guillotine hanging over him. Burntrap was more than a matter of miscommunication. The stars aligned on Peepaw to make his fizzle out. Because if you just take the intimidating voice and the design, yeah, he could have been really cool. Especially if there was a second phase of the boss fight and it was still in there. I've seen a video that recreated what that second act could have been, and it's really neat. I gotta find that again. He could have been really intimidating. But let's not forget that Burntrap's backlash wasn't just because of his boss fight was buggy and that his appearance was sudden. That was just part of it. Like him being so closely associated with Afton, who had just died, and sort of upstaging Vanny. There are so many elements involving Burntrap that happen to clash at the worst possible time. Could he have worked elsewhere? Yes. But part of what Burntrap is would be the insane amount of circumstances that brought him together. Not Afton, truly. Not Mimic, truly. Not entirely finished. Not exactly planned. Not expected. Not foreshadowed. Not his fault, but not a good look. Except his look, which was actually pretty good, in hindsight. So, what do I think of Burntrap? Well, for the longest time, well, that is directly after Security Breach came out, I was sort of in a state of aghast at Burntrap. I can't even say I didn't like him specifically, I just didn't like the idea that Afton died and immediately came back. And even after it became the common belief that the Burntrap was Mimic, I wasn't entirely on board with what went down here. But now, with everything out in the open and everything I know, I find it all kind of funny, actually. It is a comedy of circumstances, now knowing what we do. And I've sort of gotten like a soft spot for Peepaw Afton. And while I'm constantly talking about how nasty he looks, I mean it in the best possible way. And you know what? If I'm gonna be completely honest here, I think it's sort of the mess that is Burntrap and surrounding Burntrap that has led me to soften up on him so much. I can't even say Burntrap deserved better, but I can say that I almost feel sorry for him after all of this. Poor Peepaw. Maybe we're all too tough on him. Well, or maybe not. But if we hadn't, we wouldn't have had much of a story to tell, would we? And with that, the story is over. Thank you for watching.